It seems the Prime Minister is speaking about little else apart from the Voice at the moment. And yet the Voice is on track to fail at the referendum later this year, and that's according to 2 polls. This Redbridge poll, published by News Corp, found the yes case for the Voice is almost unsalvageable. And today's news poll shows there is not one state in Australia where support for the Voice has an absolute majority. Support for the Voice has fallen below 50% in every state. Only 46% of voters support it nationally. This is the first news poll to ask voters the actual question that will be put to them when the referendum is held. The yes vote, while less than 50%, is higher than the no vote in only 2 states, New South Wales and South Australia. It ties with the no vote in Victoria, and more people are planning to vote no than yes in WA, Queensland and Tasmania. We've been talking a lot on the show about how the cost of living crisis has impacted on the Voice, how people are frustrated with the Prime Minister for talking about the Voice all the time while families are struggling to pay their mortgage, other bills, their food and buy clothes and toys for their kids. This is especially the case when Anthony Albanese campaigned so heavily on cost of living during the last election. Well, this correlation between how tough people would be finding life and support for the Voice is reflected in today's news poll. According to The Australian, those earning more than $150,000 a year support the Voice the most, while those earning less than $50,000 are the most firmly against it. We saw that support fell away the lower the household income. The exception was retirees who no longer earn an income. Well, you know perfectly well how Albanese has, over the past few weeks, been trying to distance the Voice from the notion of treaty or Makarrata. There was that testy interview with Ben Fordham. And then again on the ABC with Patricia Karvelis, the PM last week said the government had no role in treaty.
If the Voice passes, will you move to trying to negotiate a treaty or treaties?
No, Patricia, because that's occurring with the states are occurring.
So you're saying the Commonwealth will never have a role with treaties?
Right now. No, Patricia, what I'm saying is that what the No campaign want to do is to focus on everything that's not happening and nothing that is.
Well, now Albanese has admitted that he does support the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, which, as you know, includes treaty.
Prime Minister, when you spoke here at Garma last year, you made what you called a solemn promise to deliver the Uluru Statement in full. You didn't repeat that promise this year. Why not?
I support the Uluru Statement being implemented in full. It's a gracious document. That's my position.
But Albanese won't say how nearly $1 million that has already been budgeted for treaty will be spent. And this is despite telling the ABC, as you heard, that the Commonwealth doesn't have a role in treaty. Well, first he was questioned by David Spears on this point of how taxpayer dollars would be spent.
You've already committed money to a Makarrata process. What's that money being spent on?
Why wouldn't anyone... why would someone disagree with the idea of Makarrata, which is a Yolngu word for coming together after conflict? What that's about is just advancing reconciliation.
So where's the money going at the moment?
And that's what it will do. Well, at the moment, what we're concentrating on is, of course, the referendum that will be coming up.
Sure, but on Makarrata, nearly $1 million has been spent.
That's about Voice.
What's that money going towards?
Well, that's about establishing a structure which will happen. But we've said that our concentration at the moment is very, very clear. And what the No campaign insists on doing is talking about anything but what is in the question before the Australian people. I'd say to your listeners, have a look at what the question is, have a look at the yes and the no pamphlets. The yes pamphlet with its optimistic appeal for hope and a vision for the future, and the no campaign, quoting people, misquoting people who actually supporting it.
For Yunupingu, a big part of his life was the push for treaty. As you know, he was involved in the Barunga Statement 35 years ago that called for treaty with the Commonwealth. That statement sits on display in Parliament House. I know you see some of this debate as a bit of a distraction, but can we just get from you, what is your approach to treaty? Where does it sit in your priorities as Prime Minister?
Well, my priority is the referendum. That's my priority. But treaty, of course, are being advanced in different places.
But at a Commonwealth level?
Back in treaty is occurring.
And there were no clear answers there. Then again, in question time today, the Prime Minister was asked at least 5 times, twice by Angus Taylor, once by Peter Dutton, a couple of times by Susan Ley, but Albanese just wouldn't answer how nearly $1 million in taxpayer funds is currently being spent on treaty.
Last week, the Minister for Indigenous Australians and the Treasurer refused to answer questions on how this money was spent. On Insiders yesterday, the Prime Minister failed to explain the expenditure 3 times. Prime Minister, what has this money delivered? Relevance, Mr Speaker. $900,000 has been spent on treaty making. What has it delivered?
A very tight question in relation to the $900,000. Is it your ruling that the Prime Minister is in order and is relevant to the question that was asked of him?
The Minister has not been asked about the Uluru Statement of the Heart. The Minister has been asked a specific question about a specific allocation of funding for a specific purpose, and it's not the first time she's been asked that question.
But we are not establishing a Makarrata before the referendum.
Look, this is a problem for the Prime Minister and for Linda Burney, where they can't answer basic questions. It makes it look like they're hiding, and this is taxpayer money. My colleague Peter Credlin was the first to obtain the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the actual document in full. This is a document that Labor is basing its policy on. Remember, on election night, Albanese said he would implement it in full.
On behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
But out of all of this, what shocked me the most is that this document that Labor supports wasn't publicly available. Why did it have to be obtained via freedom of information laws? But as Credlin points out, it's a 26-page document, not 1 page, as Albanese has repeatedly claimed. Well, Credlin wrote an analysis of the statement in her Weekend Telegraph column, and she said that be in no doubt that if the Voice gets up, there will soon be 2 classes of Australians, those with ancestry extending back tens of thousands of years, increasingly consumed with a sense of grievance and entitlement, as though modern Australia is almost entirely colourblind. She also wrote, here's the worst part of what the full Uluru Statement from the Heart proposes. Reparations or compensation paid by taxpayers, including options such as financial settlement based on a percentage of Australia's GDP for the resolution of land, water and resources issues. So just to digest that there, she's revealed a financial settlement based on a percentage of Australia's GDP, and that's from the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Well, business writer for The Australian, Robert Gottliebson, today writes that we haven't been told how these calculations would be worked out. But he says a low starting point of 1% of GDP would equal around $23 billion. Well, if the Prime Minister has been unable to answer questions from David Spears and the opposition about how the $900,000 already budgeted will be spent, it's going to get even more difficult when questions start being asked about what percentage of GDP he intends to spend on reparations and treaty. Well, Robert Gottliebson today also writes that when corporate Australia, when corporate boards embrace the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the actual statement, the full statement, wasn't publicly available. And in fact, while it's 26 pages, he says that there's references to a further 86 pages and a detailed set of minutes. He writes, our top chief executives should have known better than to endorse proposals where they didn't know the detail of what was being embraced. He says on the surface, the wording of the Voice referendum gives no hint that an aim of the body being created is to trigger a treaty that involves reparations. He writes, but look deeper. The referendum proposal has been brilliantly crafted by those advising the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to achieve the Uluru Statement goals. Well, many Labor figures privately think that Albanese is not facing reality when it comes to the Voice, and his refusal to engage in discussions about changing the model or even admit that public sentiment is clearly falling. I've wondered before whether this is because Albanese has faced critics in the past and he's managed to succeed, and he thinks the same will happen for him with the referendum. And it's now clear from these remarks he made today on the ABC that this is precisely his attitude.
There's a long way to go in this campaign, of course. I remember people telling me that there was no possibility Labor would win the last election, and I'm speaking to you from the Lodge.
Well, actually, on that point, the polls had Labor well ahead of the coalition for most of the federal election campaign. But no campaigner, Tony Abbott, says he's worried that when the Yes campaign war chest starts spending its money, the referendum will be successful. He argues that this will racially divide Australia when, like Credlin, he says he wants our nation to be colourblind.
In your humble opinion, and yes, you are out there campaigning, which says a lot about this particular issue because mostly you've stayed out of most things, does it get up?
My fear is the avalanche of money that the Yes case is going to deploy in the last few weeks of this campaign, and the moral intimidation that I think will be deployed as well. We've already seen lots of accusations that no voters are effectively closet racist. Well, that's completely false. We want our country and our constitution to be entirely colourblind.
My colleague Peter Credlin is a commentator. As you know, she was the Chief of Staff to Tony Abbott and she's supporting the No campaign, and she's made a very strong argument for the No side, particularly in her column yesterday. My colleague Chris Kenny, on the other hand, has backed the Yes case in, and Albanese referenced his column repeatedly in Parliament Question Time today. Just for the record, I'm a news journalist, and it's not the role of news journalists to tell people how to vote or how to think. We criticise the ABC for doing precisely this. So I will continue to cover the events as they unfold, present both sides of the debate, and you can make up your own minds over the next few months if you haven't already.